"We always knew you'd figure it out," my mother said, stirring her coffee in my expensive kitchen like she hadn't kicked me out 14 years ago, with nothing but a backpack and crushed dreams. "Your stepfather and I were just discussing how our tough love approach clearly paid off. My name is Samantha, and at 32, I was watching my past casually stroll back into my life through my front door, uninvited and unannounced. Patricia and Gerald, my mother and stepfather, had tracked me down through business articles about my company's success. When we saw your name in that magazine," Gerald added, his eyes scanning my living room with calculated interest, "we knew our parenting methods had worked. Sometimes children need a push to reach their potential." A push. That's what they called throwing me out at 18 because I didn't get into Harvard. Apparently a full scholarship to Northwestern hadn't been good enough for their standards. "You'll never amount to anything if you settle for second best," they'd said while packing my things. "The house looks expensive," my mother observed, her tone suggesting I owed this success to her somehow. "Though the neighborhood isn't quite what I'd have chosen. You always did make interesting choices." I kept my face neutral as I remembered the years after they'd kicked me out. The cramped studio apartment I'd shared with 3 other girls while working 2 jobs. The community college classes I'd taken at night while building my business during the day. The times I'd had to choose between dinner and bus fare. "We've been thinking," Gerald said, setting down his untouched coffee. "Now that you've proven yourself capable, it's time to discuss repayment." Repayment? I kept my voice steady, though something cold settled in my stomach. "For raising you, of course," my mother jumped in. "The private schools, the music lessons, the opportunities we provided. We invested a lot in your future, and now that you're successful, it's time to show your appreciation." I thought about those opportunities, the constant pressure, the criticism, the way nothing was ever good enough. How every achievement came with a reminder that I could have done better, been better, achieved more. "We've calculated it all," Gerald continued, pulling out a folder. 18 years of expenses, adjusted for inflation. We think a payment plan would be reasonable, given your obvious financial success." They sat there in my carefully built sanctuary, discussing how I owed them for years of emotional abuse, as if they were reviewing a business contract. As if they hadn't thrown away their daughter over a college acceptance letter. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. Let them mistake my quiet for acquiescence. Let them think they still had power over me. "We kept all the receipts," my mother continued, spreading papers across my kitchen island. "Private school tuition, ballet lessons, tennis camp, everything that helped shape you into a success." I glanced at the yellowed papers, remembering the reality behind each one. The private school where I'd never been good enough, always compared to other students. The ballet lessons that came with weekly weigh-ins and criticism about my sturdy build. The tennis camp where Gerald had screamed at me for missing serves until I cried. "Tutoring fees alone were astronomical," Gerald added, pointing to a column of numbers. "Not that they helped you get into Harvard, but clearly the education stuck somehow." My mother nodded. "Though if you'd tried harder with your application—" "I was valedictorian," I said quietly. The first words I'd spoken since they'd started their presentation. "Yes, but of a public high school," my mother dismissed. "After we'd invested so much in private education. Really, Samantha, that decision to transfer was the beginning of your rebellion." The rebellion she referred to had been my choice to switch schools after my private school counselor reported signs of anxiety and depression. They'd pulled me out immediately. Couldn't risk their perfect daughter tarnishing their reputation with mental health issues. "We're asking for a reasonable return on investment," Gerald continued. "Say, 20% of your company's annual profits, given current market valuations." "Did you keep receipts for the month after you kicked me out?" I interrupted, my voice still calm. They exchanged glances. "I don't see how that's relevant," my mother started. "I do, because I kept receipts too." I stood up and walked to my home office, returning with my own folder. Here's one for the motel room I slept in that first week. The clinic visit when I got strep throat but couldn't afford antibiotics. The payday loan I had to take out to make rent that winter. Now, Samantha. I have more. The credit card bills from living on ramen while taking night classes. The pay stubs from working retail and waitressing to afford community college. The bank statements showing every penny I saved to start my business. My mother's face tightened. That's all very dramatic, but... No. What's dramatic is throwing out your 18-year-old daughter because she got a full ride to Northwestern instead of Harvard. What's dramatic is showing up 14 years later, expecting a return on investment for basic parental obligations. Northwestern, my mother scoffed, like the name itself was distasteful. All that potential, and you settled for... I didn't settle for anything, I cut her off. I earned a full academic scholarship. Do you know what I settled for? Sleeping on a friend's couch while working 2 jobs, eating 1 meal a day to afford textbooks. Building something from nothing because my own parents decided I wasn't worth supporting. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. Now see here. No, you see here. I opened my folder wider. I have everything documented. The date you changed the locks. The text message telling me not to come back until I'd learned my lesson about mediocrity. The email where you told my grandparents not to help me because I needed to face the consequences of my choices. My mother's face had lost some of its confidence. We did what was necessary. Necessary? I pulled out more papers. Here's my college transcript. Dean's list every semester while working full-time. Here's my business license, dated 6 years ago. The lease on my first office, paid for entirely by myself. Bank statements showing every penny I earned, saved, and invested. That's all very impressive. Gerald tried to regain control, which proves our methods. Proved nothing except your failure as parents. My voice remained steady, even as I watched them flinch. I succeeded despite you, not because of you. Every achievement you're trying to take credit for came after you threw me away. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her receipts. You're being very ungrateful. Ungrateful. I actually laughed. For what? The therapy bills I'm still paying? The panic attacks during college admission season? The years it took to believe I was worth something beyond an acceptance letter? The confidence they'd walked in with was crumbling. They'd expected to find the same scared 18-year-old they'd thrown away. Instead, they'd found a woman who'd built herself from the ground up, who had receipts of her own. If anyone owes anything, I continued, it's you. 14 years of absent parenting, by your own calculations. Shall we discuss back pay for emotional damages? We did what any good parents would do, my mother protested, but her voice had lost its earlier authority. You needed motivation. I needed parents. I pulled out one final document, the one I'd been saving. Remember this? The letter you wrote to Northwestern, trying to get them to rescind my scholarship? They both went pale. Apparently, they hadn't expected that particular receipt to surface. We were only thinking of your future, Gerald attempted, but his eyes stayed fixed on the letter. Harvard would have what? Given me the strength I found on my own? The resilience I built working 3 jobs? The business sense I developed starting from nothing? I smiled, and for the first time, they looked truly unsettled. Harvard couldn't have taught me what you did, that the only person I can count on is myself. My mother gathered her papers with shaking hands. Clearly you've become bitter. No, I've become successful. There's a difference. I stood up, my full height somehow making them seem smaller. And unlike you, I can prove exactly how I got here. Every step documented, every penny earned, every achievement accomplished without a cent of your money or a moment of your support. Now see here, Gerald tried one last time. We came to have a reasonable discussion about cashing in on success you tried to prevent? About claiming credit for achievements you actively sabotaged? I walked to my front door and opened it. I think we're done discussing anything. You can't just dismiss us, my mother's voice rose. We're your parents. No, you're people who shared a house with me for 18 years, people who confused cruelty with motivation, people who threw away their daughter and now want to profit from her success. This isn't over, Gerald threatened weakly. Actually, it was over 14 years ago when you changed the locks and told me not to come back. The only difference is, now I'm the one closing the door." They stood on my porch, looking lost without their carefully prepared receipts and calculations. They'd walked in expecting to find leverage, to claim ownership of my success. Instead, they'd found something they'd never anticipated, a woman who'd kept better records than they had. The fallout came quickly. My mother launched a social media campaign, painting herself as the heartbroken parent of an ungrateful child. She posted old photos of us, carefully curated to show happy moments that never existed, each caption dripping with manufactured grief. "All we ever did was push her to excel," she wrote. "Now she refuses to acknowledge our role in her success." The comments were illuminating. Former teachers, old neighbors, even distant relatives started sharing their own memories of Patricia and Gerald's parenting. "Remember when you screamed at her during the school play because she had a supporting role instead of the lead? I was there when you made her practice tennis with a fever because champions don't take sick days. Didn't you tell my daughter she was lucky to be mediocre because at least no one expected anything from her?" Each comment revealed another crack in their carefully constructed narrative. The perfect parents who'd sacrificed everything for their child suddenly had witnesses to their abuse. Gerald tried damage control, reaching out to mutual acquaintances with their version of events. But he made a crucial mistake. He put it in writing. "We invested everything in that girl," he wrote in an email that quickly circulated. "Private schools, lessons, camps. How were we supposed to know she'd end up successful without Harvard? We had to cut our losses." Cut their losses, like I'd been a bad investment rather than their child. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, finally broke her years of silence. She sent me copies of emails from 14 years ago, ones where my mother had bragged about teaching me a lesson. "Samantha needs to understand that second best isn't good enough," my mother had written. "Northwestern is practically a community college compared to Harvard. Better she learns now that failure has consequences." I added these to my growing file. Not for revenge, I had nothing to prove to them anymore, but as a reminder of how far I'd come, of what I'd overcome. My company continued to thrive. A profile in a business magazine mentioned my unconventional path to success, highlighting how I'd built everything from scratch. The interviewer asked about my parents. "Some people teach you how to succeed," I replied carefully. "Others teach you how to survive. I'm grateful for the lesson I actually needed." The article went viral, not because of my business success, but because of what it revealed about resilience, about redefining family, about rising from rejection. A week after the article was published, my mother and Gerald tried one last approach. They showed up at my office, where my receptionist, who'd been warned about them, immediately called security. "Just 5 minutes," my mother pleaded as security arrived. "We've been doing some thinking." "Let me guess," I said, stepping out of my office. "You've realized your mistakes? You're sorry? You want to make amends?" Gerald nodded eagerly. "We were too harsh. We see that now. But everything we did was to push you toward greatness." "No," I corrected them. "Everything you did was to satisfy your own egos. Harvard wasn't about my future. It was about your bragging rights." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We sacrificed everything." "You sacrificed nothing. You threw away your daughter because she didn't fit your narrative of perfection. And now that she's successful despite you, you want to rewrite history." My employees had stopped pretending to work, watching the scene unfold. Many of them knew my story. I'd made a point of creating a company culture that valued growth over perfection, support over criticism. "We're still your parents," my mother tried again. "No, you're not. Parents don't abandon their children for getting into the wrong Ivy League school. Parents don't try to sabotage their children's scholarships. Parents don't show up years later with receipts demanding repayment for raising their kids." Security waited patiently by the elevator. My mother's eyes filled with tears, the same performance she'd perfected years ago. "You've become so cold," she accused. "No, I've become successful. You just don't like that I did it without you. That I proved your entire philosophy wrong. That I built something meaningful without Harvard, without your connections, without your approval. Gerald stepped forward. If you'd just listen. I did listen. For 18 years, I listened to every criticism, every demand, every declaration of my inadequacy. Now it's your turn to listen. Get out of my office. Get out of my life. And take your receipts with you. As security escorted them out, I heard my mother's last attempt. You'll regret this when you have children of your own. I watched them disappear into the elevator, thinking about the kind of parent I would be. How I'd celebrate effort over perfection, resilience over prestige, growth over grades. 6 months after the office confrontation, my company launched a scholarship program for students who'd overcome significant obstacles to pursue their education. The first recipient was a girl who'd been kicked out by her parents for choosing a state university over their preferred private college. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when my mother tried to take credit for inspiring the initiative. She'd posted a long social media message about how her tough love had taught me the importance of helping others. My Aunt Susan sent me screenshots of the post, along with years of saved emails documenting what had really happened. Your mother's trying to rewrite history again, she wrote, but some of us remember the truth. The truth. Like how my mother and Gerald had called every relative, warning them not to help me after they'd thrown me out, how they'd threatened to cut contact with anyone who offered me support, how they'd spread rumors about my rebellion to explain why their perfect daughter had suddenly disappeared. But Susan had quietly defied them, sending me care packages addressed to my friend's apartment, slipping money into my bank account when she could. She'd kept every email, every text, every piece of evidence of their cruelty. They're telling people the scholarship program proves they were right, Susan told me over lunch, that their methods taught you the value of education. I smiled, thinking of the acceptance letter I'd just signed for our newest scholarship recipient. They taught me something, all right, just not what they intended. My company continued to grow. We expanded into new markets, hired more employees, moved into larger offices. Each success felt like a vindication, not of their methods, but of my resilience. The business magazine that had originally featured my story did a follow-up piece about the scholarship program. The interviewer asked about my parents' claims of inspiration. Some lessons come from positive examples, I replied. Others come from learning what not to do. This scholarship exists because I remember what it feels like to have your education held hostage by people who should support you unconditionally. The article went viral again. Other successful people started sharing similar stories of parents who'd weaponized education, of support withdrawn over college choices, of success achieved despite, not because of, family pressure. My mother tried calling after the article was published. We're proud of what you've become, she said in her voicemail. We always knew you had it in you. I saved the message alongside my other documentation, not because I needed it anymore, but as a reminder of how far I'd come, of the difference between pride and ownership, between support and control. The scholarship program expanded to include mentorship opportunities. I made sure every recipient knew they had value beyond their college acceptance letters, worth beyond their academic achievements. We celebrated their efforts, their resilience, their determination to succeed on their own terms. In a way, my mother and Gerald had taught me something valuable, just not the lesson they'd intended. They'd taught me how to build something from nothing, how to find strength in rejection, how to turn pain into purpose. During a scholarship awards ceremony, one of the recipients asked me what inspired me to start the program. As I looked out at the young faces in the audience, each with their own story of family pressure and conditional love, I finally found the words I'd been searching for. Success isn't just about where you end up, I told them. It's about how you get there, who you become along the way. Sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most important things, not because of what others wanted us to learn, but because of what we discovered about ourselves. My mother and Gerald watched the ceremony live stream. I knew because they immediately posted about it, trying once again to claim credit for my charitable nature. This time, though, their attempts at reputation management backfired spectacularly. One of my former classmates commented, "Weren't you the ones who told everyone not to help Samantha when she was homeless after you kicked her out? Strange way to teach charity." The scholarship recipients' stories began circulating online, each one resonating with others who'd faced similar pressure. Parents started reaching out, not to defend my mother and Gerald, but to thank me for helping them recognize toxic patterns in their own behavior. "I was pushing my daughter toward medical school because that's what I wanted," one father wrote. "After reading about your scholarship program, I finally asked what she wanted. She's studying art now, and I've never seen her happier." My Aunt Susan attended every scholarship ceremony, beaming with genuine pride. "This is real legacy," she told me after one event. "Not the kind your mother tried to force, but something meaningful you built yourself." The company expanded the program to include emergency housing assistance for students whose families had withdrawn support over educational choices. My mother, predictably, tried to spin this as evidence of her positive influence. "We taught her the importance of having a safety net," she posted, conveniently forgetting how they deliberately destroyed mine. The post prompted my old high school counselor to break her silence. She shared the report she'd filed 14 years ago, documenting her concerns about the psychological abuse she'd witnessed, the one that had been buried after my parents threatened legal action against the school. "Remember when you told me not to ruin their reputation?" she wrote. "Look who's doing that all by themselves now." Gerald made one final attempt at reconciliation, or rather, at regaining control. He showed up at a business conference where I was speaking, cornering me after my presentation. "We've been thinking," he started, using the same tone he'd used when criticizing my college choices. "Your mother and I could serve as advisors for your scholarship program, help screen candidates, ensure they're worthy of the investment." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the intimidating figure from my childhood, but a small man desperate to claim credit for something he'd tried to prevent. "The point of the program," I replied calmly, "is that everyone is worthy of support. That's precisely what you never understood." The scholarship program's 5th anniversary celebration brought unexpected closure. Local media covered the event, interviewing past recipients who had gone on to build successful careers or start their own businesses. Each one shared how the program had changed their lives, not just through financial support, but by showing them their worth wasn't tied to their parents' expectations. My mother and Gerald weren't present, but their absence had become irrelevant. The legacy they'd tried to force through Harvard acceptance letters had been replaced by something more meaningful: a community of young people who'd learned to define success on their own terms. During the celebration, a young woman approached me, one of our first scholarship recipients. She'd recently graduated and started her own small business. "My parents reached out last week," she told me. "They said they're proud of me, that they understand now why I chose my own path. Your story helped them see what they almost lost." I thought about my own parents, still posting occasionally about their role in my success, still trying to rewrite a history that fewer and fewer people believed. Their influence had faded not through confrontation, but through the simple power of truth, success stories that proved their methodology wrong, young lives flourishing without Ivy League pressure. The company had created a new tradition. Each scholarship recipient received a journal with one simple inscription: "Your worth isn't measured by others' expectations." It was the message I'd needed at 18, now passed forward to others who needed to hear it. My final interaction with my mother and Gerald came through a certified letter. They'd decided to update their will, they wrote, and wanted to leave me their estate, with conditions. I would need to acknowledge their vital role in my success, rename the scholarship program to include their names, and allow them positions on the foundation's board. I sent back a simple response: "No thank you. I succeeded without your inheritance once. I'll continue to do so." The scholarship program had grown beyond anything I'd imagined, supporting hundreds of students who'd chosen their own paths despite family pressure. Each success story was a quiet rebuttal to the idea that love should be conditional, that support should depend on college acceptance letters. During one of our mentorship sessions, a student asked if I ever regretted not getting into Harvard. I looked around at what I'd built, Not just a successful company, but a foundation that helped others rise from similar rejection. Harvard might have given me a degree, I replied, but this journey gave me something more valuable. Proof that we're all worthy of support, regardless of which path we choose. My mother's last social media post about me remained unanswered. A mother's love is shown through high expectations. Below it, hundreds of comments from scholarship recipients shared a different message. True love supports without demands, believes without conditions, and celebrates without keeping receipts.